Okay, for this screencast, my purpose here is to demonstrate a little bit about the purpose of subscriptions and essentially how you can use subscriptions and essentially just that really big goal of why you want to use them. To really start off with talking about subscriptions, you have to understand a little bit more about the previous lesson, which I'm going to assume you've already completed before watching this video. That's the Pico-based systems lesson right here. This lesson talked a lot about the life cycle of Picos and essentially how the parent-child relationships work. For this screencast, let's just go ahead and talk about that parent-child relationship really fast to motivate why we need subscriptions. Ultimately, let's consider this kind of situation we got right here. You can ignore the Picos down at the bottom of the screen. Those are for a different project I've been working on. But for these Picos, let's say we've got like a flower shop, kind of like the activity we've been doing in the 462 class. We've got a flower shop and we got a bunch of drivers. Maybe the drivers are linked together to some organization or some such that kind of acts as a collection Pico for the drivers. Take a look at the drivers and think, in this situation, I think the parent-child hierarchies would probably be okay if you're talking about just the drivers interacting with the organization itself. However, that's really limited because when you start considering an actual distributed system, think like the flower shop, which is an entity that exists outside of the driver organization. How would the drivers communicate with the flower shop? Like, let's say a flower shop gets a new delivery to order or something. I don't know, they want roses delivered to your house in Provo or something. How is the flower shop going to reach out to the driver? If we were talking about just parent-child hierarchies, the flower shop would have to go to the root Pico, which would then send an event to the driver organization, which would then send an event to driver 1 or 2. Not only would that make for like really messy code, but that's not really kind of the goal. That's not very scalable. That's not the goal of a distributed system. So subscriptions are essentially this concept of, let's go ahead and ignore all the parent-child hierarchies. So I'll just move all these other things kind of off to the side. And let's just kind of consider just the flower shop and just one driver. We essentially want to create some sort of relationship between the flower shop and the driver so that they can communicate independently of any other organization or any other kind of system flow. I'm just choosing driver 1 arbitrarily. You can imagine a system where perhaps the flower shop has to go through the driver organization. It really doesn't matter. The goal here is to just kind of communicate the importance of this subscription relationship. Whether you choose the organization or whether you choose the driver really depends on just how you're building your system and how you want it to behave. So for the system, let's just look at these two. Okay, so the subscription process begins with the Wrangler subscription event. Now you can see and view this whole process in action in the Pico to Pico subscription lesson. I'm creating this video because I want to be able to give you a little more visual understanding of what's going on. To figure out what we need to send in this event, let's look at the Wrangler API. Now, if you remember, Wrangler is essentially just a rule set that we've written at Pico Labs that kind of acts as a operating system for any given Pico. Okay. If you look at the full API page in the documentation, you can just search in the search bar, or it's under Wrangler operating system. You'll notice that there are tons of different categories, events, and functions that you can call within Wrangler. We're really just interested in the subscriptions one for this video. Specifically, let's look at the subscription event. Okay, so this documents essentially the purpose of the event as well as all the attributes that you need to provide when you're raising it. For the subscription event, as it says at the beginning, when a Pico receives or raises this event, it initiates the subscription protocol. Okay, so this is where we start the whole process. In order to start, we need to essentially pick which Pico we're going to send an event to. All right. For this case, I'm just going to choose the flower shop just arbitrarily. So I'll just copy his ECI. And I've already built in Postman right here I've started building this URL. You notice that it's following the Sky Event protocol, and it's using the Wrangler subscription domain and type. So let's just copy that ECI in there, okay? Now if I send this event right now, it's obviously not going to work because I'm missing many of the attributes that are needed, okay? So let's take a look really fast. The first attribute, well-known TX. Well, that's kind of confusing. Well, what's going on there? It says the well-known RX channel from the other Pico that you want to establish a subscription with. Okay, and that's not maybe the most helpful. So let's take a look at the Picos, and let's think about this for a second. In a distributed system, you've essentially got this idea, right, that the flower shop wants a relationship with some driver somewhere out on the internet. We don't know where it is. We know on this system or situation that the flower shop and the driver are on the same pico-engine, but you can imagine that they could easily be hosted on separate engines. It doesn't really matter where. So essentially we need some way for flower shop to know how to send events to driver 1. That's the concept of having a well-known channel. And you'll notice right here, well-known, if you have the subscription rule set installed, like right here, and it should come installed on any given Pico just by creating it. That's done by default. But you'll notice that by default, it has a well-known RX channel. Now, what does the R mean? The R just means receiving. So this is a channel from which this Pico receives subscription events, right? And you'll notice that it also has a policy name attached to that. Now, I won't go too much into policies, but essentially just understand that a policy restricts incoming events on a given channel, specifically this channel, so that just any random Joe can't just start sending whatever event they want to this Pico and just kind of start messing things up. Instead, this only allows Wrangler subscription events, okay? So this can be considered a well-known or a global channel in which anyone on the internet can find driver 1 and send events to them. So let's take this ID, and that's going to be the well-known attribute given in this event. So let's go ahead and copy this attribute name. Come on over. And remember, we're sending this Wrangler subscription event to the Flower Shop Pico, okay? So we're essentially telling the Flower Shop Pico by providing the well-known TX, we're saying this is where driver 1 is. This is who you want to reach out to and make a subscription with, okay? And just as the R in RX stood for receiving channel, you can consider the T standing for transmit. So in this case, Flower Shop wants to transmit to the well-known channel of driver 1. Okay. Now let's take a look at the other attributes. Name and type, these aren't going to be, these aren't going to be as important in what you're doing. This is just going to be the name and type that are assigned to the channel. You'll notice that if you go on your channels tab, you'll see there's a name and type. That's really just going to be what it is. So you can kind of choose almost anything arbitrary, honestly. So let's just give it a name. I'll just say test or something and type. What was it, type or channel type? Let's see, channel type. Okay, and I'll just make something up. Okay. All right. The next thing you need to consider are the following two attributes: RX role and TX role. Okay. So as it says here, the RX role describes this Pico's role in the subscription. Now, when considering a distributed system, we've got this flower shop here, we've got a driver here. They might be equal nodes in some overall architecture, but they have different roles or different fulfilling purposes. If you remember the map reduce exercise, there were mappers, there were reducers and groupers. They all were part of making this whole system work. And you could even consider some of them as equal responsibilities as far as importance goes, but they do different things. So the flower shop his role is essentially going to be a flower shop, whereas the driver is going to be a driver, maybe delivery system. So the RX role, we're sending the event initially to the flower shop. So we're going to say my receiving role as the flower shop is going to be, let's copy this over. My role is going to be a flower shop. Okay, pretty simple. And the TX role, who I'm sending the subscription to, or who I'm making a relationship with, who I'm transmitting things to, is going to be a driver. Okay, and it's as simple as that. I won't go into the other attributes. You can look that up. It's not quite as important for this basic demonstration, but I'll leave that kind of to yourself to figure out. Let's take a look here. Okay, so I think we've got everything in place. Let's go ahead. Okay, I had a little bit of technical difficulties at the end of the last section, so I'm just remaking this part of the video. You'll notice that in the URL before, I forgot to add the EID or event identifier into the Sky Event Protocol, so I just went ahead and added that, and that seemed to fix my last problem. Anyway, so this is the same structure as we had just a minute ago. I went ahead and sent the event and got the empty directive set back. Now if we go over to the flower shop, you'll notice, let's go ahead and refresh the page. You'll notice that there's something called an outbound subscription, okay? If you go to the channels, you see that that channel test, make something up, was created, okay? So this is essentially the channel that the flower shop intends to receive new events in this new relationship that it's making with the driver. And you can view those things by clicking on the outbound subscription, okay? So this is going to give you an array of things that are essentially considered pending. Now we'll talk about the pending more in just a minute, but let's look over at the driver as well, and let's make sure that the driver did in fact receive this subscription request from the flower shop. Now remember that Wrangler is essentially an operating system rule set that implements a lot of these things for you so that it makes it easier to make these subscription relationships. You'll notice that, yeah, here it is. This channel on the driver was automatically created by the subscription Wrangler rule set, and you didn't have to do any of that coding yourself. So that was abstracted away for you, but you can see the results of that. However, if you go to the testing tab, instead of viewing outbound, you'll see that nothing's available in outbound. If you click on inbound, you'll notice here's that relationship that we initially requested or started the process in the flower shop. Okay. Now you'll notice that the RX role and the TX role on the driver are reversed. Okay. The RX role is on the driver and the TX role is for the flower shop. That's within the driver Pico. The reason why it's reversed like that, even though we provided it backwards in the initial request, is because from the driver's point of view, his receiving role is the driver. Now that might take a little bit of getting used to kind of figure out, but you have to really understand that difference because it's really important. You'll even understand that the RX and the TX are going to be different as well. Remember, R stands for receive, T stands for transmit. So you'll see here, this guy, the flower shop, the only thing he has stored in his outbound pending subscriptions is an RX. That's because he created this channel in which he intends to receive events from the driver. He stored it in this little object right here with his role and with his transmit role. And then he sent the event over to driver 1. Now driver 1, he went ahead and received that event. He created his own receiving channel with which he intends to receive events from the flower shop, but the process isn't finished yet. The flower shop still doesn't have that receiving channel from the driver. And you think, well, why doesn't the subscriptions rule set just automatically update all this for you? And honestly, we could, but the problem with that is that you take something as vital as a subscription. Now notice that this channel is not a restricted channel. If we go to the channels tab, it has an allow all policy right now. It will allow any kind of event. Now in a subscription, that could be a problem, because if we just automatically accepted any event from just any Joe who wanted to have a relationship with your Pico, that could cause problems. So driver 1 has the opportunity to actually accept the subscription or not. Okay. So if we go to the documentation page, you'll notice that the subscription event raises a couple events as a result. There's an outbound pending subscription event added, and you generally don't do a whole lot with that, but it's there if you need it. But there's also an inbound pending subscription added event that happens on the other Pico, in this case the driver Pico. So if we wanted to programmatically accept this subscription request, we could do that. And in fact, the Pico lesson, the Pico to Pico subscription lesson, does that. Let's just take a look at the code real fast. Here, it's titled Auto Accept. Okay, so it selects on the Wrangler inbound pending subscription added event that we were just describing, and that essentially says, or gives the driver the opportunity, hey, do I want to look at the attributes? Do I want to accept this incoming relationship, or do I not? And in this case, if you want to accept it, you just raise the pending subscription approval event, okay? And you just pass along the event attributes that you received in the initial request. Just once again to reiterate the dangers of this, you don't want to just accept any subscription from anybody. For the labs and for the lessons, that's all right, but in an actual production environment, you'd want to be a little more careful, maybe do a little validation, or be a little creative with that. Okay, so let's just go ahead and go back to our Pico. We still need to accept it. I don't have any rules on this driver Pico that auto accept it, so we're just going to have to kind of do it manually. So if we view the inbound subscriptions, I can actually take the ID. Let's go ahead and copy that guy. And I can find that event, pending subscription approval, right there. Let's paste that in there. And let's go ahead and hit approve. And once again, that's just the driver saying, hey, I like this relationship's proposal. Let's go ahead and accept it. You'll notice that the inbound is now cleared because there are no inbound requests happening. And established now contains this full object. And just to make sure that it worked, let's go over to the flower shop, go back to the testing, and hit established, and there it is. The flower shop now has that ECI or DID created in the driver. Okay, so now this established relationship between the flower shop and the driver allows us, let's go ahead and refresh. You'll see this pink line as validation of a subscription. We can now send events back and forth from the flower shop to the driver. All you have to do in your code is refer to the established array, and you can essentially just use the receiving role or the transmit role and kind of just play around with that however your application wants you to work with that. You can send events to all the drivers, for example. If the flower shop had relationships not just with drivers but with customers, maybe they text someone or text ads or promotions, whatever you want to do, whatever your business model is. You could have some rule in your flower shop rule set that filters the established array on people who are customers, and you just send the promotions only to customers. And once again, maybe you got a new order and you want to send an event to just drivers, and you can do that as well. Let's take a look here. How do you do this all programmatically? Okay, it was a pretty simple and straightforward process to do it manually. But you have to remember that what we were doing manually by sending the postman event right here and by accepting the event in the driver is really documented in this subscription lesson. That's really all you have to do. You just have to somehow raise or event send the initial Wrangler subscription, this initial event, to whatever Pico you want. And you just got to make sure you're providing the right attributes. And that kicks off the whole first half of the process. And then the remaining accepting process would just essentially be maybe a rule set in the driver. The driver rule set just has a single rule in there that selects on the inbound pending subscription added, and it just does some sort of validation or some such, and then approves it. And that's essentially all you need to know to get started with subscriptions. Just to do a little recap, the advantage of subscriptions that I really want to get across is in building peer-to-peer systems, okay? It makes communications so much easier. Now the flower shop can directly communicate with the driver and doesn't have to go through some convoluted parent-child hierarchy just to communicate with whoever he may want to communicate with. If you have any questions about subscriptions or otherwise, please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. And we would love, please just go through the subscription lesson as well. This contains a lot of the actual code implementation of this, if you're interested in that. Otherwise, I hope that this screencast helps you understand a little bit more about how to use subscriptions and how to use this Wrangler API, honestly. Well, thanks for watching and good luck on your future labs.